Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today, I'm going to be covering a book that I'll be breaking up into three because it's an anthology. But today's book is Jhereg. This is the anthology, The Book of Jhereg. The first three adventures of Vlad Taltos, now in one volume. This is a book by Stephen Brust, and I've mentioned this book in the past while talking about that author because when I was first introduced to this author, it was through reading the book titled The Baron of Magister Valley. Now, my understanding of this author was that the way he writes is a uniquely meta-narrative style. And while that's technically true, it's not true in a broader sense. The books that have that narrative style are the ones where he is effectively adapting Dumas novels for his setting. Stephen Brust's books in the Vlad Taltos series don't have that kind of omniscient narrative style. So like in The Baron of Magister Valley, you have a author that is writing the narration in the book, and then in certain moments someone else calls him out as not entirely being. And it also uses certain dialogue options that really annoyed me. Let me pull that off the shelf. So, I randomly opened the page to 266, and there's this discussion. "That was well thought," exclaimed Kafan. "I am pleased to learn this," said Jaren. "But did you discover anything?" asked Levosha. "Nearly." "Well, and? You wish me to tell you what I have discovered? You have understood exactly. Then I will. I am listening. He went inland. Ah, inland. Moreover, I know which direction he set out in. How were you able to determine this? First, because he did not go along the coast by water, as is proven because no boats are missing. This seems to be a just conclusion. I am gratified you think so. And as to the direction, first there is the road. Very well, the road. What next? Next he was seen on the road by a Tekla family whose cottage he passed. Very well, is there more? I followed the road for a certain distance and saw footprints leading away from the road, and I followed them and found this." At this point, she held out a thin bit of canvas that had a tear along the side. Levosha took it and frowned. "Is this from a sail?" "On the contrary, my lady, it is the sort of canvas that made up the shoes that were on the feet of the prisoners of the island." "How?" said Kefan. "You noticed that?" "I always notice shoes," said Jaren. "You perceive, I often have none, and indeed I have none now. This has resulted in a curiosity about them in others." That is a very difficult style to read in an entire book. And when that is your introduction to an author, it affects the way you see that author and the hesitation in picking up another book. Looking back at it, I recognize that that is more of an outlier because I now have, on top of this volume 1, I also have 3 or 4 other books in the series. This book, right inside the cover, has a poem looking thing that says, "The Cycle. Phoenix sinks into decay, haughty dragon learns to slay, Liorn growls and lowers horn, Tiasa dreams and plots are born. Hawk looks down from lofty flight, Zur stalks and blends with night. Isola strikes from courtly bough, Salmoth maintains, though none knows how. Valista rends and then rebuilds, Jhereg feeds on others' kills. Quiet Yorick won't forget, Sly Creotha weaves his net. Yendi coils and strikes unseen, Orca circles hard and lean. Frightened Tekla hides in grass, Jagala shifts as moments pass. Aethera rules, minds interplay, Phoenix rises from ashes gray. What they're describing in that poem is the way the different clans of this human species rule their empire. And it starts with Phoenix and it ends with Phoenix. But what this does is it emphasizes that in this culture, members of the different clans are the different houses, is really the word. The word they use is the house. So the house of Jhereg is generally associated with the animal for which that house is named. But Jhereg is unique among the houses because it is not a, I don't want to say genetically pure, but it is not a genetically inclusive house. These houses, like Dragon, which is another one that shows up very commonly in these, Dragon is another one that shows up frequently in these stories. Dragon, there are many people in that house, and within the house there are different families and clans, and different people that could inherit the throne depending on what the house, the elders or whatever, the governing body of that house decides who is the next heir. And those can be related or unrelated within that house. Jhereg is kind of a house of outcasts and strays. Members of these houses, Dragon, Phoenix, Zur, Orca, Jhereg, these are people that are elves, effectively. They live for, I think it's like 2,000 years. And they are tall, exceptionally tall, kind of like Tolkien's elves were in the Silmarillion. So they're incredibly tall, they are incredibly long-lived, they are all magical to some degree, but they call themselves humans. And they call the other humans Easterners. So in the Vlad Taltos series, Vlad is an Easterner human. He is not incredibly tall. I think they describe him, I think he's described as something between like 5'6", 5'9", something in that height. He's a relatively short Easterner. Easterners, because of their size, tend to fight, at least from his culture, tend to fight in a more fencing style, presenting only the side of one's body to the enemy. Whereas the taller humans, these elves, they are the sort that fight with big, broad swords because they are big, they have strength, they have muscle, they can swing big things around. So they are a bit more upfront about how they fight. Whereas Vlad Taltos has to be very sneaky and evasive and nimble. And because he's 2 feet shorter than a lot of the people in this setting, because he is an Easterner living among all of these much taller humans, he is, in addition, he is always the more nimble one, but he is also darting around and moving in a more mobile way than the other humans, the bigger humans, really fight. And I like that, because what this book does that the Baron of Magister Valley didn't really do, and what I don't think I've seen in other fantasies, is that it introduces almost a noir or private investigator kind of atmosphere to a fantasy setting. So, in this setting, there is magic, but because magic is so prevalent, and because these people live for hundreds of years, they are incredibly slow to change. So they have spears, they have like javelins, but they haven't figured out like bows and arrows because they don't need to. They never have needed to. They have magic that can do similar things. They, at one point in a different book, discuss that, how there's these people throwing spears at incredible speeds, and the way it's described, it's basically just bows and arrows. But that kind of technological development was never necessary for the taller humans because of their size, because of the ability to use magic, because of other setting reasons. And in the book, Jhereg, Vlad Taltos, an Easterner, is investigating someone who is trying to kill him, but also trying to take over business. It's a very gang violence slash noir slash PI kind of setting and vibe to the whole series. And it does also discuss the backstory to the character. That is one thing I really like about this, is that Vlad Taltos has a really interesting backstory. The Jhereg as a house are generally seen as the assassins, the thieves, the people that are able to do jobs that no one else is willing to do. And you can also buy a title in the house. If you have enough money, you can effectively become landed and have a title. And Vlad Taltos, his dad, wanting to leave the Easterner culture behind, bought citizenship in the house of Jhereg for him and his son. When Vlad's dad died, Vlad Taltos took over as both the one who would be the landed member with a title and also with part of the operations that he is supposed to do. So he is a person with a criminal history. He knows how to run a good shell game, how to move people around so that they think they are in charge. There are parts to this book that I don't like, which is that the following books in the series, it jumps around in timeline, but it leaves certain plot threads hanging. So Jhereg isn't the earliest in the series, and there are a couple that I've read, and I think one of them in this volume, that happened before Jhereg does, but also there are some that happen years in the future, and it jumps around in his history a bit too much. It means that in certain cases, you know he's going to survive. You just don't know how much he's going to win. Maybe he only wins a little bit, and everything in between, in the events of time between, are either in another book or advancements in his career happen off camera, so to speak. And I'm not a big fan of that. I do like the action though, and I do like the mystery and how it gets you where it needs you to be. And then you realize, oh, that hint meant this. And like, it's a well-written mystery, noir-esque story. But it does suffer in other ways. And that's my main issue with it. But it's a fascinating book. Jhereg hooked me, and then I read the next one, which was Yendi, and then following that, Tekla. And all of these books are really good, and I can't wait to talk about some of them, because Tekla especially is just a powerful book. It drops some of the noir theming and brings back, or brings into the picture, like a more civil rights era kind of thing. So it is able to do urban fantasy, but with low tech and less magitech than you would normally see in such stories. I really like it. It's interesting having a character who has a familiar that oftentimes, when he is in his own head, Lyosh, which is the name of his familiar, they are having telepathic conversations. Yeah, Loyosh. So he has a Jhereg, which is kind of like a reptilian bird. It's like if you combine, well, actually, it's almost pterodactylian in a way. It's described as being very similar to the way dragons are described, but they're pigeon sized. And instead of having feathers, they have scales. So frequently, Loyosh is on Vlad's shoulder, but they are telepathic. They have claws and a tail that can be used in combat. And Loyosh is often involved in combat to some degree as a distraction, or using its tail to poison someone, or so on and so forth. So it's interesting to have someone in Vlad's mind at all times because they are bonded as master and familiar. It allows for a character to be snarky because Vlad usually isn't. He's almost too serious all the time. So Loyosh is able to bring in some of that humor because he doesn't have the same priorities as Vlad. And so it's just an interesting dynamic. It's a fun story, and I like it a lot. I am finding as many of the other books as I can, as always, in used bookstores. Now, this one I paid, I don't even remember. Do not remember. I think I paid about $3.50, $4 for this book, and I really love it. I've read it a couple times now. I've only owned it for about a year, but in the time I've owned it, I have enjoyed it a lot. And like I said, I've looked for the other books in the series, which goes to show that I'm willing to spend more money, not just on this book, but on the other books in the series as well. So, yeah, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.